Can you see me at all now? Hey, Mary.
Okay.
Can you see me now?
Speak a bit and I'll see what happens.
Hello. Testing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Voice is fantastic. You're still paused. You're delayed in your reactions.
That's really annoying. Well, I'm terribly sorry about that.
Actually, now it's a bit better.
Okay. I'll just do an internet speed test. It's weird. I've never had. This is the first time I've been teaching almost for 2 years, and this is the first time this has ever happened. It's weird.
Although now
it is a bit better.
Yep.
Oh, good. The thing is, they're mucking around with the wires out in the street because they're putting NBN in, and ultimately it'll be really good, but at the moment it kind of sucks. Okay, so what we can do now is...
Oh, it's improving all the time now.
Oh, good. Yay! All right. What I wanted to discuss, so I will just share my screen again. Okay, so for this week's tutorial, I wanted us to look at remedies under the ACL, because as I said, generally speaking, the ACL is pretty streamlined, and it's it's the far better option, put it that way. If you come across some kind of misrepresentation in your professional life and you're looking for a cause of action, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be better, quicker, cheaper, faster to go under Section 18 of the ACL than it will be to go via common law. And so given that is the case, I think it would be very remiss of me to not go through remedies under the ACL that are available for breach of Section 18. In terms of the main remedies, excuse me, in terms of the main remedies, before we actually get to unpack that IRAC, because I wouldn't mind doing a brief IRAC with you, think about the 2 main provisions, Section 236 and Section 237. What is Section 236 all about? What do you get under 236?
Well, it's an action for damages.
Yes, it is. So show me the money. Now, we had endless discussions about this all term. Let's have it again. What is the measure? Is it the contractual measure of damages, or is it the tortious measure of damages?
Contractual. No.
Under the ACL.
I was going to say tortious under the ACL.
Under the ACL, I shouldn't have shouted, should I? Tortious. So Now, I won't be so categorical, Tam, because the High Court has almost, they've come so close to saying we will never give contractual damages under the ACL, but they just eased back from the edge of the cliff at the last moment. And they basically have said, we won't not say that, contractual damages could be appropriate. They've kind of said, we don't dislike the idea. It's not like we like the idea, we don't like the idea. They've just kind of gone, generally speaking, tortious will be the measure, but we're not ruling out, we're leaving ourselves a back door in case in another set of circumstances we want to go down that track. So generally speaking, it will be tortious. So the case that says it will be, generally speaking, the tortious measure, do you remember the case? It's the one where there was a sale of a lot for development, and the misrepresentation was that the townhouses that could be built would fetch a whole lot of money on the open market, which they actually didn't. And then the purchasers of the lot of land got their own feasibility study done on how much it would cost them to get the townhouses built. And their own feasibility study said, unfortunately, inaccurately, that the townhouses would be really cheap to build. So it made the whole prospect of getting a profit out of that deal much more attractive, because the real estate agent had said, oh, you're going to get all this money for these townhouses, and their own feasibility study has said, oh, you can build these townhouses really cheap. So they're thinking they're going to get this inflated amount of money if they go ahead with the deal. And in actual fact, the misrepresentation that started it all, which was these townhouses would be worth a squillion, was incorrect. Is that ringing bells?
I can't remember the name of it, but I remember the case.
Yeah, very familiar.
Henville and Walker. Yeah.
That's right.
And the case that talks about that it will generally be the and they use the tortious measure in Henville, but the High Court case where they kind of tossed the whole idea around was Gates and City Mutual. That's the one that talked about contract tort, and they use the tortious measure in Henville. Gates and City Mutual was a bit unfortunate. I don't know whether you read the facts of that one, but the poor little man bought some insurance that he thought was going to be disablement insurance, when you get hurt and you can't do your work anymore. And he did get hurt and he couldn't do work as a builder anymore. And
they wouldn't pay it.
Unfortunately, they didn't pay. And so obviously there you can understand. I guess this is a good fleshing out of the whole tortious thing. So what he wanted was for the insurer to pay him out the disability payments as though what they had said about that policy was correct. So in essence, what he was really looking for was expectation losses. And that is the classic hallmark of damages in contract, is to be put into the position as if the contract had been performed. And they actually got up at first instance, and then very sensibly the insurer appealed it all the way up to the High Court. And they said no, tortious measure only. Part of the problem was that where you have misleading and deceptive conduct like that, because there is this fairly clear notion that you can't get expectation losses. You have to look around and see whether or not you would have gotten the same kind of contract elsewhere. And it's only if you would have entered into the same kind of contract elsewhere, if the misrepresentation or misleading or deceptive conduct hadn't occurred, that's really the only time when you're going to be able to get expectation loss. And in that case, it hadn't been proved that poor old Mr. Gates would have shopped around if they'd said no, or if there'd been some problem with that insurer. There was no indication that he would have gone with another insurance company to try and get this kind of insurance. Also, there were other problems, you know, like the premium that he was paying on this particular policy was quite suspiciously low. And if it was going to be like a disablement policy of the kind that he thought, you know, it was a real bargain. Like normally you'd expect to pay much more. So they were the main things that shot poor old Mr. Gates in the foot. And the High Court came down on the side of only allowing the tortious measure. So that leads very nicely into me recapping that expectation losses these are available in contractual damages, but not tortious measure under the ACL, and it's only where you can show you would have entered another contract that had the expected benefit that you can claim the expected benefit under the ACL. Okay? And it's almost like a kind of consequential loss in a way. So you're not actually giving them what, can you see? It's a bit of fancy judicial footwork, really, because you kind of end up in the same spot at the end of the day, but you can see what the court is saying. They're not saying what we are going to do for you, Mr. Plaintiff, is put you into the position that you would have been if the contract had been performed, because that's the contractual measure. So, given that we're only using the tortious measure, what is the amount of money that will be required to put you into the same position as if the naughty conduct hadn't happened? And in that situation, if you can say to the court, if that naughty conduct hadn't happened, I would have entered this other contract and I would have got this other benefit, then you can claim that other benefit from the person that engaged in the naughty conduct. Slight and fairly technical difference, but it is a difference that you need to be aware of. Okay. Other things you can claim: lost business revenue, lost opportunity. So, like in Adelaide Petroleum, the Adelaide Petroleum case that I go into in the videos. Damages for mental distress are also possible under the ACL. So these are all heads of damage that you would go for under Section 236. Okay. Section 237. Now, what is Section 237 all about? What's it for? How does it work? Tell me.
Compensation orders.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this is where the court, well, the second part of it is where the court can order where they see fit, basically. Make an order where they see fit.
Yes. Yep, exactly. So the section that it hooks up with, you've got to actually, here, I'll put a little thingy, and you've got
243, isn't it?
Yeah. You make the claim under Section 237, and then you ask for the orders or whatever else you need. Under section 243. And under 243 is I'll put that in here. It's inclusive, not exhaustive. What does that mean?
Yeah. Basically, at the end of the day, the court can do whatever they want.
And they normally do anyway. It's kind of like I was saying before, that often there's so much judicial fancy footwork that goes on. There's a lot of hot air, but it all means the same thing. But technically, to keep within certain doctrines, things have to be said a certain way. But inclusive means this is just a list of stuff that the court might want to do under 243, but it can do anything it wants, really. So we have that nice, very, very nice little grab bag of stuff that is available under 243. What I like, the way that, the traditional kinds of remedies have been fiddled about with, so you can ask that a contract be declared void, fair enough, okay. But have a look at that. You can look at asking for a contract to be declared void from a certain date. So here you're really starting to be able to tailor the remedy for the particular facts that you've got on hand. It's really nice. I really like the way that they drafted up 243. The traditional you can refuse specific performance, refunding money and ordering to pay the amount of loss and damage. Now, I will come back to those two in just a minute. Repair or provide parts, supply services, and they can make different orders in relation to land. The confusing bit in 237 is these ones. Why are they confusing?
Because damage, it comes back to the damage, the whole concept of bringing a claim in contracts for damages, conflicts a civil case, like inequity and all that kind of stuff. It conflicts. Whereas if you can get it across the line through the ACL, that opens up a whole new dimension, because if you get it across the line under 237 or under 23, if you get it across the line there, the court can do whatever it wants. But they don't tend to, in the little cases I've seen and looked at, concentrate on a great deal of money in that area, because they don't want businesses to go broke. But what they basically look at is punitive things like penalising, companies and charging huge amounts of fine, which links in with another section of the ACL.
Oh, be careful of that, because they're civil pecuniary penalties, and they're typically not available in our neck of the woods here in terms of.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, no, and that's why I specifically haven't gone into the pecuniary penalties. But you know where you will touch on those, in corporations law.
In what?
Corporations law.
Okay.
Or competition law.
Christmas present. That's what I'm doing next.
You should do it in corporation law, and there's a separate subject now for it. I think Lance Rundle does it, which is competition law.
Okay.
And the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, so the ACCC, they are the ones that usually will enforce and seek those nasty civil pecuniary penalties. And they can be millions and millions of dollars. The scariest part of that formulation, so Tam, we're talking about where the
246?
24.
Is that what you're talking about? The way the remedy is available to the ACCC?
Yeah. Massive.
Millions. Some of them are over millions, like 1.1 million or something. It's just horrific.
massive.
Is that where they also make them do like the advertising and all that sort of stuff, like make them do silly things?
Yeah. Let's have a wee looky here.
So what you're saying is that that's not applicable to what you're saying here. Is that right?
Yeah, because it's for only certain. It's only for.
We don't have to worry about that for talk.
No, you don't have to. It's not on the exam, so you can turn
Okay.
off. Now.
All right, thanks. That's all I need to know. Thanks, AJ.
Yeah.
Sorry about it.
Competition
Okay.
law is where you'll strike up, that kind of stuff, civil pecuniary penalties and whatnot. But in terms of, I guess what I wanted you to note was that Section 236 is for damages, right? So you're looking to get money under 236, and you've got all of these.
Oh, that's double dipping.
And you don't have much the second bite of the cherry under 237. Is that what you're going to ask? Is that what
Double
you meant?
dipping.
Double dipping. Is that what you meant?
Yeah. So
Okay.
when would you ask for something under 236 and not 237, or ask for something under 2? Oh, how untechnical is that? When I say something, I mean money. When would you ask for an award of money under 236 as opposed to 237? Because look at, I'm particularly.
Well, if you go back to your case, or you're on your three.
Look at that one. How is that different to this? Let me stop sharing. I'm going to take you to the actual legislation because it's interesting. I'm just going to share my whole messy mind like I normally do. Okay, so if we go to here, 236 and 237. So 236, if a person suffers loss or damage because of the conduct of another person, right, and they contravene Chapter 2 where we are, they can recover the amount of loss or damage by action. Let me just move this over here. Against that other person or any other person involved in the contravention. Oh, what do they mean by any other person involved? Who's that?
Well, it can be anyone to do with one individual person involved in a contract, or a corporation, or
Yes, you're heading in the right direction. So that's got to do with all that, those the provisions in relation to directors and servants and agents, employees being responsible for a company's conduct. And it also has to do with where they're specifically using the phrase person involved, that harks back to the provisions that cover aiding and abetting. So, for example, if a naughty real estate agent makes a misleading or deceptive conduct, misleading or deceptive representation, and somebody else was in cahoots, for example, the person that produced the glossy brochure that the real estate agent handed out, if they were aiding and abetting, then they will be a person involved. And all of them and the company can be liable under 236. Okay? So that's 236. And then you slot down here, on application of a person, the injured person who suffered or is likely to suffer loss or damage because of conduct of another person, that, here we are again, here's us, that was engaged in contravention of Chapter 2, a court may make such order as they think appropriate. And then you go down to your 243 and you see that provision, the kinds of orders that the court can make. Excuse me. Here we go. refund money, pay loss or damage. E is the one that's kind of quite confusing because it seems to be saying just in a more roundabout way that you can, claim damages. Now, in practice, I haven't seen many requests for damages under 237, but notionally it's there. Let me go back here to the thing here. The main differences between 236 and 237 in terms of if you were going to claim monetary compensation have to do with whether or not contributory negligence is available as against your claimed remedy, and whether or not your client has suffered the loss that they're going to be claiming for, or whether it's more in the nature of an anticipatory loss, contingent loss. Okay, now if that's the case, you'll only be able to claim under Section 237. Can you tell me why? I'll go back to the actual.
So, sorry, what was the question?
If your client hasn't
actually suffered the loss yet.
Can you claim under 236 if they haven't?
Yes, you can, but under 237, no, because of the way that it's set out and that it's about compensation for loss suffered.
You've got it right, but it's the
wrong way around.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, numbers. It's getting late.
I know where you were going. So if it's just a contingent kind of loss, you're going to have to go under 237.
Yeah.
In terms of 236, what might make that unappealing in certain circumstances is that there's a nasty other provision in 137B that says for example, like in the Hen John Walker kind of scenario where somebody has perhaps relied on their own reports and not checked the truth of what has been told to them, if that was found to be like unreasonable kind of conduct, if they're trying to claim damages in that kind of, for example, a Henjo kind of scenario, now we've got 137B in there. It's much clearer that you can argue that the party was contributorily negligent, so they should bear some or all of their own loss. Okay, but this argument, this defence of contributory negligence, is only available against a claim for damages under Section 236.
Yeah.
So that's the main distinction between the two. I just wanted you to make sure you got that straight in your head. In terms of common law, and for causation, where you're thinking about your vitiating factors, and I'm thinking specifically about misrepresentation, and we had a little look at causation there, and the test that evolved from the High Court was that it had to be a cause, not the cause. Can you remember what case that was? Oh, you don't mean to ask questions like that at 7:45.
Exactly.
Good and fabulous. It was the High Court case that said it has to be a cause, not the cause. So it just has to be, I think the phrase they used was an inducing factor, not the inducing factor. Now, that was adopted in terms of, so that was at common law, but you know that with Section 18 quite often they'll drag in stuff from the common law because it kind of sits right alongside the common law, doesn't it? And in the endearingly called Lord Buddha case, you have this principle was applied. So it's just a cause, not the cause. And the test is the usual, you know, or common sense. Okay, so if there is in amongst your factual matrix there somewhere a bit of a doubt about who caused the loss, you're going to have the similar kinds of tests that you would be using at common law. Okay. That's probably about all I wanted to say for the ACL remedies side of things. Do you want to briefly just have a little look at, and don't worry, I've typed in stuff for the rest of it there. I'll put up all these notes afterwards. Let's have a wee look at that IRAC, because it's a little bit interesting. You'll switch off immediately when I tell you that I don't have, the IRACs in the exam don't deal with you know, the ACL stuff, so you're all good there. So you can go to sleep if you wish to. But because we're going to specifically look at remedies this week, so we'll go through and say, can Rocco obtain remedies under the ACL from Maria? That's your issue. I hate it as a question. There we go. Okay. Now, if you're doing a full-blown IRAC like we did on this before, you'd want to be doing the whole, you know, section 18 of the ACL, you know, prohibits misleading or deceptive conduct. And you'd probably be telling me, you know, a company shall not in trade or commerce, blah, blah, blah. If you're in an exam kind of scenario, geez, that's hard, isn't it? It's not in the exam. But if you were in the exam, I'd certainly forgive you for just putting something like that in the rules section and then dealing with each of the elements in the application section rather than writing them all out twice, because it's just, your hand would be by the end of it. But obviously you've got your elements there are a corporation shall not.
It's feeling a bit like our oral submission.
Yeah, I know, right? It is, isn't it? In trade or commerce, engaged in conduct that is misleading or deceptive or likely to mislead or deceive. Yeah. Engage in conduct. Actually, I should put that one as a separate one. So, you know, we looked at...
So you say, AJ, that in terms of the exam, you don't want us to answer our IRACs in terms of the ACL itself? You want us to use common law in cases?
Yes, because I've told you, Mary, that we're not looking at the ACL in terms of the IRACs for the exam. We're looking at termination.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can actually check out now mentally. But yeah, this is the way you go through it. Like I said, if this was an exam, what is absolutely necessary in the rules section would be that bit. But then if you would you then also look at what, like section 2 where it says what engaging in conduct is, or you wouldn't need to go into that sort of detail if we were doing this for legit? No, not really, because, well, for completeness you might, but there has been very clear conduct. That engaging conduct part is really super important where you're talking about silence because that's where there's that's usually where there's a decent fight to be had. Was there conduct? Was there no conduct? What did they actually do?
What is conduct deemed to be?
Yeah. It's normally where there's been, I suppose I should, some kind of omission. That's really where you would have a fight on that element. And then obviously you would need to be going and citing, those definitional sections that assist you by saying that, engaging in conduct includes, otherwise than inadvertently refraining from speaking up. Similarly, trade or commerce, everyone knows it's the old concrete constructions and Nelson. As long as it has that anything with a commercial or trading character, it's going to be in trade or commerce. And typically, the fights that you would tend to have there centre around things like employer-employee situations. Remember, we were saying before when we were looking at this way back in week 2, those kinds of relationships are generally, they're not in trade or commerce, they are in relation to. So normally internal dealings like employer-employee dealings won't be in trade or commerce. It's normally the outwardly facing transactions that a company does with other companies that will be in trade or commerce. Okay. Previously, there used to be a question about non-profits because there was nothing in the definitional sections that said, that trade or commerce could or couldn't be stretched to include non-profits. And now,
but that's changed now, hasn't it?
Yeah, now it can. Yeah. So now that particular lack of clarity has been cleared up. So, and here again too, often it's just going to be taken as a given. You don't see, for example, in the main cases that you read on these things like in Henjo or wherever, you tend not to see a big judicial discussion about these elements because they're so darn obvious. If there's a company, then it's obvious the element is satisfied. So where you will have fights, is around things like where there is some doubt about the company's registration. Have they been deregistered? Are they in the process of being deregistered? Were they never registered in the first place? Have they been trading as a company but not actually been properly constituted? That's where you'll get the fights around that element. So a lot of these elements are almost taken as given. The real big thing, obviously, is that one. So, and that's where the court will spend 99% of its time, unless, as I said, there's some reason for it to dilly-dally around with one of the other elements. Then that's where the court's going to be spending the bulk of its time in its judicial discussion. So, yes, unless your main provision is Section 18 that you would need to mention here, but if, say, for example, down here, there were issues of silence, you'd need to be looking at the other. Now, was it the Main Act? I always forget. I'll jump over to my...
Yeah, the Main Act, I think.
Act. It's the definition of, Section 4 in the Main Act. So obviously you'd be putting in that provision there. And then in terms of remedies, so what remedies would we be wanting Rocco to look for? Well, two big things stick out to me, which would be that one and that one. Yep. There's nothing else, is there? I can see. Nope, they just say they're going to set up this arrangement for her to expand her infrastructure. So she needs 30 grand. He says, yeah, okay, fair enough. They write up a loan contract. She blows it all on, his Facebook party. So he's lost his 30 grand. He hasn't got his decent seafood supplier, and he's lost out on a contract that he was going to enter into. But instead of paying out the $8,000 on that contract, obviously he's decided not to go ahead with that contract because he wanted to use that money to go to Maria's contract. So he's missed out on that. I mean, there's a big fat red hand if I've ever seen one. Please discuss expectation loss here. Okay, so we are looking at section. Well, would we go for 236 or 237? What would we do? What's the traditional way you would run? Now, bear in mind, what did we say about going for 236 and 237? Now, there's no issue of contributory negligence here, is there? So there's no danger in using 236. There's nothing, it's not a contingent loss because he's actually suffered both of these losses. He said no to the cutlery people. So he's actually missed out on that saving. And there's nothing to worry about here so far as contributory negligence. So we don't have to, we're not forced into 237 because it's not a contingent loss. If it was a contingent loss, and it hadn't been suffered yet, then you'd have to, the only provision you could use would be 237. But given that this is a standard old run-of-the-mill damages claim, you'd probably run it under 236. There's nothing to stop you from running it under 237. It's just, I don't know, it just tends to be run under 236. So, if this was in an exam, let's just think about this. If you wanted to say something sassy like 236 is the provision dealing claims for damages, you might also say 237 allows compensation orders to be made for losses, damage. So you could just flag for the marker, look, I know what I'm talking about here. We could shoot for 236, we could shoot for 237. Either way, what we're going to be asking for is, to get our 38 grand back. So they're the provisions that I'd probably be...
But you couldn't claim both, could you?
No.
Yeah.
No double dipping. And if you're going to mention 237 and be sassy, you'd...
Under contract, wouldn't it be safer to go with 236?
Yeah. And I actually had this exact question last year. And yes, I jeepers, under the old Trade Practices Act, and that's giving my age away, under the old TPA, you'd almost never see a claim for damages under 237. I never really even thought about it until I kind of came across this particular text. And it did say, yeah, you can hypothetically use 237. I think there are a few cases that have successfully run under 237. It's just, I don't know why, under the old TPA, you just tended to go for 82, which was damages, and not 87, which was these funny little ancillary orders provision. But, yeah, you can't get both. There's no double dipping. Okay, so if you were going through all of this normally, you'd have to work out, is this misleading? You go through all your elements, go through your elements and give them a tick, all right? And then here, just for sake of time, we can say, obviously there are here. Rocco owns a restaurant. She's now... I wrote it this way. Now, Now, I think in the original question they're companies, but if they're not, what's the glaring thing here?
Well, it falls over at step one because it's an employee-employer.
Yeah. Oh,
That was the original. That was the original IRA.
yeah, that was the original. But here, if we, okay. Now, hang on a second. I think I say somewhere, how would you answer differ if they were companies? Anyway, here we go. So, assuming that they're companies, we get over the first hurdle, tick. In trade or commerce, tick. There's no employer-employee situation here because he is a restaurant, she is a supplier. So she's up in the supply chain. There's no issue of silence or anything like that because we have a contract. Yeah, misleading or deceptive. Well, they've agreed in the 30 grand that, you know, it's going to be for expansion of her infrastructure. So if she has misrepresented to him that that's what she will spend it for whilst they're negotiating the contract, then that's going to be a misrepresentation, isn't it? If somewhere in those negotiations she has said, this is what it's for, and it's clear that that's what's happened because then they've written up the contract according to whatever they've negotiated, then that is the case. Think about it, flip that on its head for a moment, people, because we're nearly at the end of term and I need you to be thinking in a nice, savvy manner for me and try to flip things around in your head and thinking of them in different ways. So if you're not going to be thinking about misleading or deceptive conduct, what's the other big red ticket item that you could use here in terms of your cause of action? They have a contract now, and the contract payment terms, as you know, assumedly say that they require her to expand her infrastructure. So if she has then used that money to do stuff other than
illegality, fraud.
Illegality is a very narrowly defined cause of action. No, it wouldn't be illegality.
Well, under the ACL, wouldn't she then be subject to their inexhaustible list of all sorts of penalties for doing that?
Oh, yeah, we're looking at misleading or deceptive conduct here, but I'm thinking flip it on your head. If you're not going to be talking about common law misrepresentation and you're not going to be talking about misleading or deceptive conduct under the ACL, what's the other thing here? Obviously, they've got a contract. It says, I will give you 30 grand in return for that grand. Yes, it's a breach. Yes. So you're going to be thinking laterally. This is what I'm saying. Because the nice thing about when you're drafting your pleadings is that you can just chuck in all of this stuff in the alternative. Yeah? So and it's just the shotgun approach. You know, if one thing sticks, great. If that doesn't stick, try something else. So you can whack in a breach there as well. But obviously this is not the week to discuss breach. And it's already 8:05. So in terms of remedies, you would be saying Rocco has lost his $30,000 paid over specifically because Maria, and when I'm saying Rocco and Maria, remember all the time, I just put here Maria Pty Ltd so that we know we're talking about companies. Said that it was to expand her infrastructure. So then you would be saying, in terms of causation, because you need to kind of give that the tick. So using the Gould and Vagelos test, Maria's conduct was actually more than a cause of Rocco's loss. It was the cause, actually, wasn't it? That was applied under the ACL by the, I love the name of that case, Lord Buddha. It was also Campbell and back office investments as well. So if Maria had not warranted, I won't use that word, that's nasty, had not represented she'd used the money for this purpose, Rocco would not have paid it over to her. So we've done tick for the causation. So then under Section 236, a claim for Rocco's lost payment to Maria of $30,000 would be made. And then you would also discuss, like I said, a big fat red hand, Rocco's other loss in this situation is the $8,000 he would have. Now, I think I said he would have saved that money. Yeah, he wasn't able to take up an offer by a commercial kitchenware company to buy a bulk lot of tablecloths and cutlery, which would have saved him $8,000, right? So here, Rocco's other loss is he would have saved because of entry into the other contract with the cutlery tablecloth supplier. As a result of doing the deal with Maria, he did not pursue this other contract. Yep. Thus, you can say this loss was also caused by Maria's misleading conduct. Okay. Now, here you would probably want to be talking about, you could probably say, that's probably all you need to do. You probably want to cite the Poseidon Adelaide Petroleum case. In that case, one contract was not pursued because of misleading or deceptive conduct by the other party, and the potential benefits from the contract that was not pursued were awarded as damages under the legislation. Yep. If you're an HD answer, I probably would like to see something, a nice little sassy line like, these kinds of damages must be clearly distinguished from expectation loss under the contractual measure. Actually, up here, you probably would be wanting to say here, the measure used is the tortious measure to get Rocco back to the pre-tort position, as if the transaction hadn't been made. So he would likely get his $30,000. Yep. So here. These kinds of damages must be clearly distinguished from expectation loss. However, they are allowed as per Poseidon. Yep. Cool bananas. Okay. Are we happy with that then?
Yep.
Mary, you sound very definite. I think we're all just relieved it's not on the exam, right? Okay. It's not really hard to get your head around. It's just a little bit finicky. There's just a few little things that you got to understand. That's all.
There's lots of shuffling throughout the actual statute. That's what I find.
Yes. Yeah.
It wasn't written very fluently.
And I think for me, it's trying to make the distinction between torts and contract within the ACL as well. That's where it becomes a little bit, confusing. And in torts, the ACL is part of the exam, and to the point that she instructed us to actually have the ACL printed off and there with us at the exam, so it's being examined. And I guess in my mind, I don't want to confuse it with the contract side of it as well.
Yeah, right.
Well,
big tip to the wise then. It's not on the exam, so you're cool. Okay.
Relief.
Yeah. I'll let you go. Now, given that it's 8:15, I may not get those contract terms up for you tonight, but I'll.
That's okay, because I'm really not going to look at them tonight.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. I'll get them up tomorrow, and then you can start chipping away at your.
Start afresh in the morning.
Yeah, chipping away at termination. Cool. Thanks, guys. I will stop sharing.